I'm Kathy with a C.
And I'm Kathy with a K.
And this is Killer Destinations. Today's destination is Davidson County, North Carolina. The county was named in honor of Brigadier General William Lee Davidson, a Revolutionary War hero who was killed in action at the Battle of Cowan's Ford in 1781, just south of the county named in his honor. The area became famous for its furniture manufacturing, formerly the home of Thomasville Furniture. Also, it became known for its vibrant barbecue culture and the location of Daniel Boone's hideout. Today, the county is home to a growing population, with the booming city of Winston-Salem leading the way with its vibrant art scene and consistently ranking highly for overall quality of life. And just 15 minutes from the city is the Meadowlands residential and golf community of Wahlberg that provides safe streets and the serenity of country living with the convenience of cities close by. But in 2015, the safe streets of the Meadowlands neighborhood were clogged with paramedics and police personnel. The facade of one large home and the manicured lawn belied its interior, which was the location of a gruesome death that shocked the community to its core.
In 2006, 30-year-old Irishman Jack Corbett was living the life he'd always hoped for. He'd grown up in Limerick, Ireland, and just 3 years earlier, he'd married his childhood sweetheart, Margaret Fitzpatrick, who everyone called Mags, and started a family.
Should I sing an Irish song?
Can you sing Irish Eyes Are Smiling?
When Irish eyes are smiling, all the world seems bright and gay. I need a pint of Guinness if I'm going to sing that.
Oh, only if we're in Ireland for it, though. Temple Bar, only place I'll drink Guinness.
Oh, really?
Well, actually, that's not true. I'll only drink into the Guinness factory. But I've heard, and I have to believe it's true, I don't like Guinness beer as a rule, but I always heard if you take a tour of the Guinness factory, you're going to love the beer and anywhere in Ireland because it's made right there. It's the shipping that takes away from the lovely, lovely velvet taste. And so I drank it. I loved it. So Jason and his childhood sweetheart Mags started a family, and their son Jack was 2, and their new baby daughter Sarah was just a few months old. And in the blink of an eye, his world shattered. His amazing wife had a severe asthma attack, and doctors couldn't save her. Mags was gone, and he was alone raising his 2 young children. Luckily, Jason was close to his family. His parents lived nearby, and he had 5 brothers and 2 sisters who wanted nothing more than to help. But he was still struggling to raise the kids alone as a single dad who worked full-time. So in early 2008, almost 2 years after his beloved Mags died, now 32-year-old Jason decided it was time for him to hire an au pair to help look after his children. He worked as an executive at a healthcare packaging company, and this took all of his time and focus. So he posted a profile on an au pair agency website, and one of the responses really caught his eye. It was a 25-year-old woman from Knoxville, Tennessee named Molly, and her application stated that she'd always loved children, and she was looking for a major change in her life, and she was excited about moving to a new country. So Jason hired her, and Molly soon moved to Limerick and began working as a nanny for then 3-year-old Jack and his 1-year-old sister Sarah. And Kath, just a year after Jason hired her, the 2 of them started a relationship and eventually became engaged. However, Molly was missing her parents and her 3 brothers back in the U.S., and Jason agreed to move back there with her and take the children. He was able to stay in his same position at the same company, but just transfer to their North Carolina operations. So in 2011, 3 years after Molly arrived in Ireland, Jason and Molly moved to the U.S. with his 2 children and started their new life together. And just a short time later, the 2 got married, with Jason's family coming from Ireland and Molly's family coming from Tennessee to join them in their celebration. Now, as they settled into their new home in Wahlberg, and just to be clear, I don't think it's named for Marky Mark or that guy who's in New Kids on the Block. It's spelled differently, but you never know. Wahlberg was a small community in Davidson County called the Meadowlands that we referenced earlier. Jason and Molly decided that she should be a stay-at-home mom, and he continued to work in an executive role at his company. And even though Molly didn't live as close to her parents, Tom and Sharon Martins, as she wanted, they were only a 4-hour drive away in Knoxville. So this was close enough that her parents would come to stay with them for a few days at a time once her father Tom retired after 30 years with the FBI.
On August 1st, 2015, this is 4 years after Jason, Molly, and the kids moved to North Carolina, Molly's parents, 67-year-old Tom and 70-year-old Sharon, traveled from their home in Knoxville to visit their daughter and her family. And as usual, Tom brought gifts for his 2 grandkids. He'd packed a Little League baseball bat for 10-year-old Jack and a tennis racket for 8-year-old Sarah. And it was around 8:30 at night when Tom and Sharon finally arrived at Jason and Molly's house. Jason was in the driveway drinking a beer and talking to a neighbor, and he walked over to greet Tom and Sharon and take them inside. And Molly had held the dinner, so the 4 adults ate together, enjoying their time and catching up. When they all turned in for the night, Tom and Sharon slept in the guest room on the first floor. But just a couple hours after they went to sleep, Tom was startled awake. Now, he laid in his bed trying to figure out what the sound was that woke him up, and he suddenly heard a scream and loud voices coming from directly above the guest room, and that was where the master bedroom was located. So Tom jumped out of bed, and he grabbed the first thing he saw, which was the Little League bat that he'd brought for Jack. And so he grabbed it and he ran upstairs. Going toward the noise, Tom threw open Jason and Molly's bedroom door and saw the 2 of them facing each other. And then he noticed that Jason's hands were around Molly's neck. So Tom rushed in, and Jason sees him. He takes his hands away from Molly's neck, turns her around, and puts her in a chokehold. And so now Molly is between her dad and her husband. And so Tom is screaming at Jason, "Let her go, let her go." And Jason is yelling at the top of his lungs, "I'm going to kill her, I'm going to kill her." He keeps repeating it over and over. So Jason begins to drag Molly down the hall toward the bathroom. Molly's dad, Tom, is freaking out. He does not want Tom getting Molly in the bathroom, closing the door and locking it, because he's afraid something horrific is going to happen in there and he wouldn't be able to save her. Okay, so to keep Jason from dragging Molly into the bathroom, Tom swings this, child's baseball bat and hits Jason in the back of the head. But Jason doesn't go down. And so Tom is shocked that he didn't go down. And he didn't swing multiple times because he was afraid he was going to hit Molly. But what he does is that he gets in the way of the bathroom door so that Jason can't shut it. So Jason apparently realizes that he made a mistake and he wants to drag Molly back into the bedroom. And so Tom swung the bat at Jason again, but Jason caught the bat with his left hand. And him doing this, Kath, caused him to loosen his grip on Molly. So she was able to squirm away and break free. So now Tom and Jason are struggling for the possession of the bat, and Jason shoved Tom hard across the bed, and Tom fell face first onto the floor. And he laid on the floor and he heard Molly scream, "Don't hurt my dad." So Tom pulled himself up and rushed Jason, and the 2 continued to struggle for control of the bat. So Molly, who is now free to move, ran over to her nightstand and picked up this square brick paver and struck her husband on the head with it. So this allowed Tom to regain control of the bat, and he continued hitting Jason until Jason fell down. And when he was certain Jason couldn't get up anymore and hurt him or Molly, Tom called 911. Here's the 911 call from that night.
Davidson County 911. My name is Tom Martins. My son-in-law got in a fight with my daughter. I intervened, and he's in bad shape. We need help. What do you mean he's in bad shape? He's hurt? He's bleeding all over, and I may have killed him.
And while Molly and Tom waited for the police and EMS to arrive, they took turns administering CPR to Jason.
Davidson County paramedics arrived at the scene within 10 minutes of receiving the 911 call. One paramedic quickly determined that Jason had suffered severe heavy trauma to the back of his head. And Kath, when one of the paramedics attempted to lift Jason's chin in order to prepare him for intubation, the hand that was holding the back of his head as he lifted the chin, all of his fingers went inside of Jason's skull. 39-year-old Jason was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, inside the house, first responders observed a significant amount of blood on the floors and the walls of the master bedroom, dry blood on portions of Jason's body, and the square paver on the bedroom floor. And one investigator even remarked it was one of the bloodiest crime scenes he had seen in a long time. Now, deputies from the Davidson County Sheriff's Office retrieved the two children from their bedrooms, and despite all of this noise, they were both asleep and undisturbed. Molly was outside of the house, and she was in the fetal position beside a deputy's car when two paramedics approached to examine her, and both of them saw redness on her throat, and when one of them asked what had happened to her, she said she'd been choked. Aside from Molly's symptoms of shock and the redness and soreness to her throat, none of the first responders observed any other apparent injuries to Molly or Tom. According to court records, it was later that day when Molly submitted a written statement to the Davidson County Sheriff's Office, and it said, "My husband, Jason Corbett, was upset that he awoke and an argument ensued with him telling me to shut up, and he applied pressure to my throat/neck and started choking me. At some point, I screamed as loud as possible. He covered my mouth and then started choking me again with his arm. My father, Tom Martins, came into the room, and I cannot remember if he said something or just hit Jason to get him off me. Jason grabbed the bat from him, and I tried to hit him with a brick," and then in parentheses, she wrote, "garden decor I had on my nightstand. I do not remember clearly anything that happened after that." With Jason deceased and Molly now at the police station, Jack and Sarah were taken to stay with one of Molly's brothers who lived about an hour south in Union County. And that was where a social worker met with them to conduct separate interviews. Kath, during Jack's interview, he said that his dad got mad at his mom for no good reason, and he shared that one time Jack was accidentally pushed down the stairs while attempting to break up a fight between his mom and dad. His sister Sarah similarly said during her interview that her dad was angry on a regular basis, and then she told the social worker about an incident when her dad pulled her mom's hair and smacked her mom in the face. Then, just 4 days after Jason's death, after already meeting with the social workers, Jack and Sarah received child medical evaluations at a nearby children's advocacy center. 2 Davidson County Sheriff's detectives requested that the children specifically be asked about issues including domestic violence and familiar relationships, and Kath, they actually submitted a list of questions. There were like 15 of them, and it included things like, was Jack or Sarah afraid of their dad? Did the kids like or hate their mom? And on it went. And so during this interview, Jack described how his dad often got angry with his mom over little things like bills and leaving lights on. And Jack stated that his dad would physically and verbally hurt his mom, and he had personally witnessed times when his dad punched, hit, or pushed her. And according to Jack, his dad's anger problems had gotten worse over the past few months. Now, when asked about the square paver that was in the master bedroom, Jack actually knew what it was there for, Kath. He said that he and his sister and his mom had gone out to buy flowers that they were going to plant in the front or the backyard. I guess they hadn't decided yet, but Molly had brought this square paver because they were going to paint it and put it in whichever garden they planted. But when they wanted to paint the paver, it had been raining, and so Molly brought it inside so that the paver didn't get wet. Now, like Jack, his sister Sarah similarly stated during her interview that her dad would get angry for silly reasons. And Kath, this was even strange. Like, Sarah actually pointed out that when he was accidentally woken up after he'd already fallen asleep, he would get really angry. And Sarah explained that sometimes she had nightmares and would go to her mom for comfort, but that her dad would get really angry if she accidentally woke him up too. Now, Sarah described one such incident that occurred on the night her dad died. That night, Sarah had a nightmare involving her bedsheets. I guess her bedsheets had fairies on them, but when she had woken up, She didn't think they were fairies. She thought they were insects. And so it was kind of scaring her. So she went to her mom and dad's bedroom and asked her mom if she would change her sheets for her. So when her mom got out of bed to go to Sarah's bedroom, her dad got really mad, and it led to the fight between Molly and her dad.
Despite what Jack and Sarah said about their dad's temper, just 1 week after his death, the Davidson County Sheriff's Office announced they were investigating Jason's death as a homicide. And while they wouldn't release details, they did tell the press that they were not looking at anyone outside of the home as a suspect.
Gee, I wonder who they were looking at.
Boink! That was a light bulb.
Oh.
So 1 week after Jason's death, Tracy Lynch, who was Jason's older sister, flew to North Carolina from Ireland to bring his body back to Ireland for his funeral service and to take custody of his 2 children who had been born in Ireland. So Tracy and her husband David were named as guardians of the children in Jason's will should anything happen to him. But when she landed at the airport, she was told by the Department of Social Services that the situation had changed and they were instead in the care of their stepmom, Molly. So because Jason's will was written before Jason and Molly married, Molly's attorney fought for custody in the court, basically saying Molly was the only mother that Sarah and Jack had really known. And both children called her mom. But Tracy, the sister, was like, no, Molly has not ever legally adopted the children in the 4 years that she and Jason were married. And this was because my brother didn't want Molly to adopt them. In fact, the children were in the U.S. on Jason's work visa, and he never even applied for citizenship for himself or his children, even though he was married to Molly. Jason loved America, but he missed home, and his sister told the judge that one day he intended to move the children back.
And apparently that was something Jason was very upfront about with people, that he did love America, but he loved his homeland. And in his mind, he always wanted his children to grow up in Ireland. And so by the time they were teenagers, he wanted them to be back there so that they could learn the culture, they would immerse themselves in the culture, because that was their homeland. But ultimately, Kath, Jason's sister Tracy and brother-in-law David were named permanent guardians of the children. The court said that Jack and Sarah Corbett were citizens of Ireland, and the court believed that this is what the children's parents, Jason and Mags, would have wanted.
So 5 months after Jason Corbett's death in January of 2016, Molly Corbett and her father Tom Martins were indicted by a grand jury, and each of them were charged with 1 count of second-degree murder and 1 count of voluntary manslaughter. And they both pleaded not guilty, and their joint trial began 18 months later in July of 2017.
I didn't understand actually why they were charged, but they weren't charged until they were indicted, and again, we're going to repeat it. I'm going to repeat it for everyone forever and ever. You can indict a ham sandwich.
Totally.
It's hammy Sammy time.
Totally. Indictments are not difficult.
Exactly.
If a grand jury doesn't indict, then your case is so bad, it is unbelievable. Even though in some states, and not all states, the prosecution is supposed to put on the exculpatory evidence, I'm sure they just do it with like fingers crossed behind their backs.
Exactly. Don't look too hard at what I'm saying. And you know what? Look over there.
Right. Look at that ham sandwich.
Who's hungry?
Exactly. But one of the things I wanted to say, Kath, second-degree murder is basically an intentional killing with malice, but without premeditation. So it's often used in cases like a road rage. It could be
passion killing.
Exactly. Like something spontaneous and you go nuts. And voluntary manslaughter is an intentional killing without malice. And so it's a situation like, I intended to kill you because I perceived that I was in danger for my life, but I was wrong. My interpretation of the facts were unreasonable, but I didn't have malice in my heart. And so sometimes voluntary manslaughter is referred to as imperfect self-defense. Like, I thought you were going to kill me, so I got you first, but it was so unreasonable for me to think that it's a crime. So the prosecution at trial relied very heavily on the forensic evidence in the bathroom, the hallway, the bedroom, and showed the jury Jason Corbett's body in the undeniably violent fight scene in the master bedroom. So anyway, it was clear to the jury that there was a violent struggle.
And Kath, these photos were so gory and graphic, one of the jurors vomited when she saw the pictures.
Oh,
seriously? It was that
seriously?
gory. Yeah.
So first responders testified, and these were the law enforcement officers who were present at the scene that night. And they talked about how bloody the crime scene was, that Tom, Molly's father, was reasonably calm, that kind of stuff. And the state also presented testimony from the medical examiner who determined Jason's cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, including extensive skull fractures. And so one of the things that people were wondering, Kath, was whether Jason was on anything. And he really wasn't. He had a blood alcohol of 0.02, so maybe he had a beer, and then he had a low level of an antidepressant in his system. So there was nothing that would have jacked him up. And so sort of the coup de grace for the prosecution was a forensic scientist who performed blood stain pattern analysis of the crime scene. And he said that the first blows inflicted on Jason could have occurred while he was lying in bed.
But couldn't say if they did or did not.
Right.
I find blood spatter experts to be hard to take as a
discipline.
As a true crime podcaster is what I was going to say, but a discipline is much better because it's your own opinion.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what experts give, their own opinion. To me, and I agree with you, I see what you're saying, like the way blood will fly and hit a wall, for example, and then depending on,
Well, I guess they can change their narrative to fix who it is who's paying them.
Yes, honestly, like many experts.
Right.
And
It's not
there's
just blood spatter.
Two sides to every coin.
Right.
But my general theory on experts is as follows. If an expert says something to a juror and it does not ring true with common sense, so they're looking at a photo and let's say there's blood spatter on the photo. Let's say it's a wall and the spatter's clearly sideways. There's drips of blood. Like you can really follow a pattern. You're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But if somebody's showing you a photo and there's blood spatter on a bed and somebody's telling you how it got there, it's like, well, wait a second. There's a lot of ways
it could have gotten there.
But jurors can reject expert testimony if they don't think it has credibility. But anyway, so this blood spatter expert talked about blood spatters found inside the quilt and saturation marks, discovered on the mattress. He talked about blood spatter on the wall and indicated Jason suffered multiple blows as he was falling to the floor. And he even went so far as to say that, in his opinion, some of the blood spatter suggested the crime scene had been altered before the police arrived to photograph it.
The defense was dealt their biggest blow before the trial even started, because by this time, as we know, Jason Corbett's children were in the custody of his sister and brother-in-law and living in Ireland, and thus beyond the subpoena power of a trial court. So the defense can't subpoena the kids to come testify. So as a result, prior to trial, defense attorneys moved to admit the interviews that were conducted by the Union County social worker and then a few days later by the Children's Advocacy Center in the days following their father's death. And the judge denied the motion. Molly's father, former FBI agent Tom Martins, took the stand to testify in his own defense. And he told the jury that he awoke to a violent altercation in Molly and Jason's bedroom and intervened to save his daughter's life when he saw Jason with his hands around Molly's throat, screaming that he was going to kill her. And Tom maintained that he hit Jason with a metal baseball bat only after Jason refused to release Molly and advanced toward him. And in interviews with police after Jason died, Molly actually further corroborated this, saying she hit Jason with the square paver to protect her father. Now, in early August of 2017, this is 2 years after Jason Corbett was killed, Molly and Tom Martins were found guilty of second-degree murder. That day, the judge sentenced each of them to 20 to 25 years in prison. And Kath, the defense immediately announced they were going to appeal. So, the appeal toddles its way through the court system. It can toddle, right?
As appeals do.
Exactly. And 2.5 years later, in February of 2020, the North Carolina Court of Appeals ruled 2-1 to overturn the murder convictions. And Kath, they ruled that they were denied a fair trial because the judge improperly excluded the testimony from Jason Corbett's children.
And so, Kath, the prosecution, of course, does not want these interviews from the kids in. And they basically told the trial judge, you know what, this is hearsay. These kids are in Ireland now. They're not coming back. And
they said that Jason's sister and brother-in-law had since contacted the prosecutors and said, oh no, they were brainwashed. The kids are recanting everything they said.
Right. Anyway, so the prosecutor's like, hearsay, unreliable, you can't bring them, there's no cross, blah, 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 blah. And the judge agreed with the prosecutor. But the Court of Appeal was like, hang on a second. This was a social worker. The first interview was a social worker. And the second interview was for mental health attention for the kids. And so the Court of Appeal was like, you know, there's an exception to the hearsay rule for statements made for the purpose of medical diagnosis. It should have come in under that.
Remember, the detectives gave the psychiatrist specific questions to ask the children, and all of these questions were about domestic violence and their dad and what their mom did, and it had the potential to help the prosecutors at trial.
Right.
But it didn't.
Exactly. But it would have helped the defense. And it actually fell under the realm of medical diagnosis because it was things like, are you fearful of your father? Do you dislike your mother? You know what I mean? It was like emotional things tying into the whole psychiatric component.
Right.
But anyway, so the Court of Appeal said, you know what, this could have come in under the medical treatment exception, but there's also this sort of like catch-all exception to the hearsay rule where if the circumstances are inherently trustworthy, where these statements were made, and are they probative? And so judges always have sort of this catch-all resource if they want to admit hearsay. It's not often used, but it's there. But anyway, so the Court of Appeal was like, the kids should have been heard.
And so the prosecution starts hopping up and down, and they file an appeal that toddles on up to the state Supreme Court. And the following year, the state Supreme Court upheld the Court of Appeal's ruling that the judge acted improperly and denied Molly and her dad a fair trial. So, of course, the prosecution refiled the charges, and Molly and Tom remained in jail pending a new trial. 2 years later, in October of 2023, the second trial was scheduled to begin, but just a week before it started, it was announced that Molly and Tom had reached a plea agreement. Molly pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter, and her father Tom pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. The more serious charge of second-degree murder was dropped. So that day, instead of a jury trial, the court started the sentencing trial. The maximum possible sentence for the two of them was 17 years in prison. Now, at the sentencing trial, the state called several witnesses to the stand from local law enforcement and the state crime lab. They also presented the 911 call made by Tom when Jason was killed to show how calm and in control he was.
You know, and Kath, I know that people were like, what the heck? After all of this, they're going to plead guilty. I mean, it was to voluntary manslaughter. And again, that's called imperfect self-defense. But Tom Martin's attorney was like, listen, my client is a responsible citizen, and he knows he caused Jason's death. And the attorney basically said, you can't imagine what it was like for him when he saw his daughter being strangled. And Tom knows he reacted from an emotional standpoint, and he wants to take responsibility. He wants to acknowledge that it was by his hands that Jason died.
And remember, Molly pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter. And that was when her attorney shared that there was a history of domestic violence in the home and that Jason had anger issues. They presented testimony that Molly was terrified of Jason, along with statements the couple's children previously made that we've spoken about regarding physical and emotional abuse in the household. So after the hearing, the judge sentenced Molly and Tom to 51 to 74 months in prison. Because the two were credited with the 44 months they already served for their initial conviction, they only faced a few additional months behind bars. Both were officially released from a North Carolina correctional facility in June 2024 after serving a total of 4 years and 3 months.
According to a People magazine article,
Hey, they know the dirt.
Yes, we are quoting People magazine.
We're summarizing People magazine. Well, it is considered to be the court record for the masses.
You raise a very fine point.
Thank you.
So in this article, it said that Sarah and Jack had been living in Limerick, Ireland with their aunt and uncle, Tracy and David Lynch, since their father died. They now go by the last name Corbett Lynch, which they added to honor their aunt and uncle who raised them. 19-year-old Sarah, who is the more outspoken of the two, is an avid diver and has also written 2 books about her experiences. One was called Noodle Loses Dad, and it was a 2020 children's book about loss, grief, and blended families, and her memoir, A Time for Truth, My Father Jason and My Search for Justice and Healing. And that was released not too long ago in February of 2025. 21-year-old Jack is much more private than his younger sister. He is a singer-songwriter who is currently studying music in college, and he prefers not to speak publicly about his parents, Jason and Margaret, or their deaths. After being released from prison, Molly reportedly moved back to Knoxville, Tennessee, near her family, where she has kept a relatively low profile. Her father, Tom, who retired prior to Jason's murder, returned to his home in Knoxville in June of 2024. Now, as you can imagine, this case has caused a lot of controversy. There are those who support Jason and his family and believe vehemently that Molly contrived a plan to kill Jason in order to have exclusive control over the children. Then there are those who cannot imagine a formerly high-ranking FBI agent conspiring with his daughter to commit a cold-blooded murder. However, we will never be able to hear both sides of what happened that night.